This is Fresh Tracks Weekly. This week we are going to talk about the Big Beautiful Bill and what it means for hunters and public land users. While the public land sale portion was axed, a lot of language that was left in the bill is going to impact our public lands, and we now know more about what that language means, so Randy is going to fill us in on that. Also, next week we are launching Elk Week, which is like Shark Week, but for elk. The plan is to roll out elk-focused content every day. We have all sorts of videos, including Joel Webster's elk hunt in Nevada, which is a super cool story, super cool hunt. Really proud of that one. So that's coming up. We're doing a calibration test with Randy on packing an elk quarter's worth of weight in the mountains. We're going to have my buddy who is now working on an elk research project in Montana to tell us about some of the recent research. All sorts of cool stuff. Michael and Blake have been working overtime just trying to get all that stuff dialed. We're going to have a new elk shirt that is released along with an elk stamp, and proceeds from that stamp are going to go to Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. Pretty cool stuff going towards elk conservation. So big week next week, Elk Week. Keep a lookout for it. It'll be a good time. Anyway, here are a few of the news stories from the week. The Wall Street Journal recently published an opinion piece from their editorial board voicing their disappointment that Mike Lee's plan to sell public land was cut from the Big Beautiful Bill. They argued that it was a good policy idea and that the Republican senators' complaints about this public land sale were unjustified. The article went on to make the same false claims that Mike Lee has been touting, such as making homes more affordable for the middle class, saying that all of these parcels of land are unused, along with claiming that local communities would benefit, not developers. These claims, of course, we've debunked in previous episodes through numerous examples. But I did find it interesting that in this Wall Street Journal piece, it has a comment section, and it was overwhelmingly full of comments disagreeing with the authors. It has become very clear that people who have never experienced public lands will never understand what is at stake when selling them. Maybe we need to find an analogy to explain it to Wall Street. Public lands are ours. We own them. They are part of our portfolio. So would you want to give up 1% of your portfolio for zero benefit? And land is something that I'm pretty bullish on. They aren't making any more of it. You really think it's a good idea to just sell it? All to make other people wealthy? Anyway, we know that a lot of people will never be convinced of this, and we know that people will continue to push the idea of selling public land. This article is another indicator of so, and the idea is not going away anytime soon. WyoFile has new information on the Wyoming Corner Crossing case that has now officially been petitioned to the U.S. Supreme Court. The landowner who has been battling the 4 hunters in this corner crossing case, Fred Eshelman, submitted the petition to the court this week, and WyoFile obtained a copy of it detailing the argument of why they think corner crossing is considered trespassing. Here are some of the quotes from Eshelman's petition. Quote, "The 10th Circuit decision steamrolls state law, takes easements, and revolutionizes property law affecting up to 150 million acres of private land. And that it has, quote, already created confusion about the new legal landscape." The petition goes on to say, under the 10th Circuit's rationale, the Unlawful Enclosures Act necessarily permits the public to access public land even if it requires trekking through dozens of miles of private land, end quote. To me, that seems like a pretty big reach, as mostly I've seen the 10th Circuit decision being interpreted as though corner crossing is only legal by doing it to a similar manner to the 4 hunters where they crossed exactly at the corner, not even touching the private land, and only crossing over the airspace of the private land. But Eshelman's lawyers continue to clarify, claiming that the 10th Circuit decision improperly decided that the federal law preempted the Wyoming trespass law and that a federal law shouldn't easily overrule a state law. The petition went on to say that even if a corner crosser were to use GPS technology on a cell phone, that they would have trespassed multiple times in searching for the corner, which is really interesting logic, as they just assume people corner crossing will do it sloppily. Anyway, it's interesting to see some of the quotes from this petition, and we'll all be very curious to see if the Supreme Court decides to hear the case. I guess this is a Wyoming-themed week, because WyoFile has been publishing some really interesting stories about public land and wildlife. This one has to do with the Federal 10th Circuit Court of Appeals blocking the BLM, the Bureau of Land Management, from rounding up wild horses in southern Wyoming, We've talked about wild or feral horses plenty in the past and how they can wreak havoc on landscapes, how the Wild and Horse Burrow Act has made them difficult to manage, leaving one of the main options being roundups where they capture horses to be adopted or to live out their life in a government-funded facility. It's not a great scenario, but it's the one that managers currently have to work with, and it helps alleviate damage to public lands by removing those horses from BLM. Anyway, these roundups have been done a ton in the past, but animal welfare groups are constantly trying to stop them. In this particular case, it kind of seems as though the BLM didn't cross their T's and dot their I's to the court's liking as they plan to round up and remove 3,600 feral horses. The main reasoning, it sounds like, that the court blocked it was because the BLM didn't explain in their proposal whether or not the roundup would maintain a, quote, thriving natural ecological balance. So this case got kicked back down to the district court to be reconsidered. It sounds like the BLM is going to have to rephrase their plan to show that removing these horses will achieve a, quote, thriving natural ecological balance. So at this point, it's still in limbo as whether or not the BLM will be able to remove those 3,600 horses. Another one from WyoFile, they reported that a popular backcountry lake in the Wind River Range had some of the highest levels of poop of any lake in the nation. The Environmental Protection Agency took water samples from the lake that showed the fecal contamination levels to be 384 times higher than their safety standard for swimming. Yeah, that's just swimming. We're not even talking about drinking water. The lake in question sees a significant amount of traffic from backpackers and climbers, both of which, need to take craps while they're out there. And it sounds like most of them are at least burying their poop to some extent, but in those areas that they're doing so, it drains into the lake. And one theory is that during spring snowmelt, fecal matter is more likely to end up in the lake as it drains into the basin. Interestingly, water samples from other lakes did not have nearly as high of levels of contamination. An individual that was interviewed by WyoFile in this article mentioned that he thought it was because there were so many climbers in the area, and that could be part of the problem, which honestly kind of makes sense to me. Not necessarily because they're climbers, but because if you poop up in the scree fields or in the rocks and just bury it in those bigger rocks, it's not a whole lot of organic material in there to help it decompose. And rainwater and snowmelt is just going to more easily move that poop downhill into the lake. Other high-use recreation areas have had to go to wag bags or some sort of portable toilets to reduce human poop on the landscape, but to have to do that many miles into the wilderness might be logistically challenging. Anyway, the Forest Service and Wyoming Department of Environmental Quality plan to continue to collect data in the area to come up with a plan if it continues to be a problem. A study looking at wildlife's response to solar farms was recently published, giving more evidence to support the negative impacts of these solar developments. The main impact is obvious. These solar developments are taking up physical space, excluding wildlife from land with high fences. But what was less known is how much displacement was happening beyond the fences. The study utilized collar data from Pronghorn before and after the construction of the Sweetwater Solar Facility in Wyoming. Seeing the GPS data on the map, it's blatantly obvious that they can no longer get into the fenced facility, but when they analyzed for areas that Pronghorn were selecting for the most, they moved significantly further from the facility than just the fence, and the distance from the facility of the areas that they were preferring increased over time. They had data showing that Pronghorn selected for habitat within the area that the solar site was developed before construction, but after construction there was significantly less use within 1 kilometer from the boundary, and the impact was still seen out to 1.5 kilometers from the development. So all development has an impact on wildlife's use of the landscape, but it is helpful to quantify it like this to better understand what's going to happen as more land is developed. All right, we are jumping in to our deeper dive talking about the Big Beautiful Bill and what some of that language means to public land users, to hunters, and what we might see in the coming years. So the dust is settling a little bit from the public land sale attempt from Mike Lee in the Big Beautiful Bill.
Yeah.
But we continue to learn more about what actually passed when the Big Beautiful Bill passed. Yeah. And there are a lot of things in there that affect public land and basically our opportunity to hunt. I think it's safe to say that our access to hunting in public lands will still be significantly reduced from the provisions that were in this bill.
Public lands and public resources are going to be, we've said this, right? They're a currency. Yeah. And the remainder of this bill all the other details that were in the Senate energy side of it, but also all kinds of different parts and places. The amount of stuff that's in there, we don't have time to go through it all. But I want to point out some of them so that people understand what went on here. And yeah, we won the big fight of not selling any public lands. But we lost so many other pieces that are going to be really, really hard to put back in place.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's things to do with a lot of resource extraction and basically going back in time decades of, and like the whole idea is to like cut red tape and to make things more streamlined, which I can understand the frustrations with some of that. But when you look at the big picture, I mean, I'm not saying that everything was perfect the way it was. It wasn't. Right. But to just completely, like, to do what they did is pretty significant, the amount of changes and lack of oversight, and then a lot of forced stuff, which is really, there's stuff that a lot of people weren't even asking for. Like, some industry might not have even been asking for this, and then anyway. Right. But
the oil and gas industry, the timber industry, a lot of them are like, we can't even do what you're throwing in here. We don't have the capacity to do that. Yeah. But probably some of the easiest ones to start with. And before we say this, you know, we need these resources. We're not saying we don't need resources, right? I gas up my truck. I burn natural gas to heat my house. I mean,
yeah, for sure.
We need
resources, but there's a way to do it that doesn't completely destroy wildlife habitat. And like, there were systems, and they, like I said, they could be streamlined and made better, but there are systems in place that make decisions based on certain priorities. And if wildlife is a high priority in one area, or very critical habitat, migration corridors, things like that, that's the process that you know, biologists and a lot of agencies would go through to make sure that we weren't wrecking everything as we extract resources.
Yeah. So if we start just with the oil and gas provisions, you know, the existing, prior to this, the royalty rate that an oil and gas company paid on federal land was 16.7%. Well, that's going back down to 12.5%. So over a 25% reduction in the royalty rate that's going to be paid by oil and gas companies on federal land.
Which is a hypocrisy of that is like, if you're trying to, you know,
manage better and get a better return on our lands.
Yeah, exactly. If you want to make more money or balance the budget, shouldn't we be raising our lease rates to be more in line with
state and private?
Yeah, like a fair market value. This is a subsidy. It's a government subsidy to the oil and gas industry. Right. There's no way around it. That's what it is.
Yeah. And so if you look at these lower royalty rates, they weren't at the market rate to start with at 16.7% or 16 2/3, whatever. Now they get knocked down another 25%. And here's one of the problems with that. A lot of these people who hate public land want to plant the seeds of frustration out in the rural landscape. Well, some of these federal royalty payments get split with local governments and with state governments.
Right.
So when they cut this by billions of dollars every year, that's billions of dollars of money that local government, state government, school boards were counting on. And now they're going to give it away.
Go straight to the general fund. And then also, but again, like, so the revenue that is coming in goes straight to the general fund.
On the timber side.
Oh, sorry, that was the timber. Yeah.
So that's a huge change on the timber side when we get to that.
But in terms of, like what you said, essentially just that subsidy is going to the large corporations. It's not going to the local communities.
Yeah. So now if you're a local government out there that depends on oil and gas royalty revenue split from the federal government in your county or in your state, Congress just took away a huge pot of your money and gave it to somebody else. It's just that simple. Then they got rid of, in the old days, we used to have non-competitive bids on oil and gas, where you could nominate a parcel And for $1.50 per acre, you could lock it up for your oil and gas use as a non-competitive bid. Well, we got rid of that, and it's like, no, if we're going to put one up for auction, it's going to be a competitive bid.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Which makes sense. Yeah,
we want to get the best return on our lands.
Yeah.
No, got rid of that. We're going back to the old non-competitive bids. So then, and we're just hitting the highlights, Marcus.
Well, and then I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I think this was still in oil and gas, where you can nominate, or of the nominations from corporations of the land that they want to see, leased for oil and gas, it's a forced 50% of those have to be offered up for lease.
Right.
So the corporations can just request more.
Right. Yeah.
They can if
more, and 50% of more is more than what it used to.
It's mandatory. Yeah. Like they have to offer up 50%, which is just kind of ridiculous. Yeah. Like it doesn't even. Yeah.
And then coal is getting another big royalty cut. Right now they pay 12%. It's going down to 7%, or not more than 7%. So it possibly could get even lower. So that's a huge problem because, again, if you are a county in southeast Montana, in parts of Utah, parts of Wyoming, and you rely on these coal royalties, because you're the one dealing with the impacts of people living there and roads and everything else, and water tables getting disrupted, and now they're like, nah. We think we're going to just cut those. So they're cutting all these rural budgets significantly based on what their revenue share would be from the federal revenues. Why? Because they're giving it to their friends. I don't know how else to say it. And then here's one that almost causes you to shake your head, that says, right now, if there are federal coal reserves located on federal land that's adjacent to a mining plan that's already been approved, or is adjacent to coal reserves on state or private land, they are authorized to be mined. No questions asked, no approvals, no anything. It's just, all right, if there are federal lands that border your private mine, you can have at it. So, I mean, people are going to think we're making this up, and we're not, right? And we know we need all these resources, but before all this giveaway stuff, we were still getting our resources, right? There was no line we're out of gas down at the gas station. There was no shortage of, no one had enough natural gas to heat their house. And so it's like, why?
Yeah, and I think one of the hardest parts for me is just with so many of these changes of developing more land, or if it goes into a coal mine, or it's, we put in a bunch of roads and pads for oil, and again, we need our resources, but to not do it carefully is just really disappointing to me, because you don't go backwards. Like you can't, it's very, very rare that you go back and you're going to reclaim a site and put in native vegetation and bring back these areas. It's basically, it's almost always a permanent change.
Yeah.
And so that's like when we're doing this, it's not like it's as a one-time thing or a temporary thing. It's permanent.
Right.
And as you take away public lands, whether you're selling them or you're developing them, that's just less and less piece of the pie available to wildlife.
And for other multiple uses.
And for,
other authorized multiple uses.
Yeah, for sure. And so it's just, that's the hard part, to just not have a critical eye in what we're developing and how we're developing it is crazy to me. It's disappointing, but
Yeah. So then, and this, people always say, well, Newberg, you come from a logging family. Your brother's a logger. You worked in a sawmill. You're always sympathetic to the logging business. Well, I believe in active forest management. I'm all about that.
Yeah.
But the logging provisions in here are unsustainable. What they say, the Forest Service has to increase its cut every year.
250 million board feet.
Every year.
And so if you do 250 million board for the first year, then you got to be 500
500.
million the second year. So
Yeah.
you have to increase that amount every year.
Right. And
Which
so
is just-
on the BLM, they dropped it down to 20 million board feet.
Which is, yeah,
increases.
I mean, but if you think about the amount of available timber on BLM and on average compared to Forest Service, it's probably a similar proportion of available timber.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's supposed to go through every single year through 2034.
Right. So again, this is going to kill some of these rural communities that are logging communities and counties. Right now, depending on, then there's some weird laws about the Oregon, California stuff and BLM and Forest Service. Between 25 and 50% of timber receipts get split locally. Every dollar now of timber receipts is going back to the Treasury in Washington, D.C. because they needed to close their gap
Right.
in how much this was going to cost.
Yeah, that's what I misspoke about earlier. But yeah,
Yeah.
so now this money is going straight to the
Straight to the
general.
Treasury. So
Yeah.
if you're a rural county in logging country of Washington, of Oregon, Northern California, this bill just took a huge portion of your budget and sent it back to D.C.
Yeah, which alone is extremely disappointing. But then also, again, we need our resources, timber, everything, and there probably was. It was very restrictive to get logging
Right.
done, and so I can see the demand and the reasoning for wanting to have
Right.
more timber cuts in
Right.
the U.S. in the Western U.S. But the pendulum swung so far the other way that it's like, really, we couldn't find something in the middle here, because this
Yeah.
is just, it's gonna go through like in order to meet that, we're going to have to go back to old style clear cuts if they're actually going to
Yeah, I don't know how they're going to
feasibly.
do it based on just selective harvest.
There's
It's
no
gonna
way
be
to like
very
go.
hard.
Yeah, I mean,
And
unless
there's a
I'm
lot of
mistaken,
timber
but,
that's inaccessible. So the remaining accessible timber,
right?
and then if the agencies aren't getting this cut out,
They're breaking the
technically
law.
they're violating what this new law is.
Yeah,
And so we could go on and on and on, but part of the 50-year plan that these anti-public land groups have had has been to frustrate local communities. And I've never seen a bill, other than when they messed around with PILT, which is payment in lieu of taxes, how the Department of Interior pays its taxes, and when they messed around with SRS, Secure Rural Schools, how the Forest Service pays its property taxes. I don't even think when those things got tinkered with, it was as a big of a hit to local rural economies and rural government than what this bill is. And what's going to happen? Now we're going to have local governments understandably frustrated, mad at the federal government, mad at their BLM guy, mad at their Forest Service guy, when they should be mad at the people who passed this bill, who came up with these ideas. We could have easily done all this and kept considerations for wildlife, kept consideration for, all the things that are there.
yeah,
And yeah, we needed to change some things about logging on federal lands. There was no doubt about that.
Mm-hmm.
But what this does, it's like, really? So, and then the amount of stuff about how quickly land or timber sales and oil and gas leases and coal leases have to be approved.
right.
And the waiver of all the National Environmental Policy Act provisions and stuff.
Yeah, I'm curious what it's going to look like. I mean, if you were to imagine, because right now a lot of the timber cuts that get proposed right now are stopped and halted because or at least delayed because of lawsuits and environmental groups suing over this is lynx habitat or grizzly bear habitat or whatever, spotted owls. So I guess I'm still confused. Do you think that this will? Obviously, people are going to still sue, probably
They'll
as things
still
go.
litigate, probably.
And do you think that will? What I don't understand is that still going to delay some of this, or do you think that
That's what I don't know. I don't think it will.
because they're going to be forced, or there's like a mandate that they have to get X number by X date. So
Yeah, because a lot of this language kind of tries to say, oh, this bill complies with NEPA. National Environmental Policy Act.
Gotcha.
So by saying it complies with NEPA, it exempts it from NEPA.
Okay.
Now, whether or not, I've been asking around. Now, when I read this, what does this really mean? And you get some varying opinions on it. But suffice to say, the considerations previously given to wildlife, important habitat like wintering range, migration corridors, summer range in a lot of places, is those protections just went.
Yeah.
And we're going to see it. We're talking about it from a hunting standpoint. We are going to see consequences to wildlife and wildlife herds because of these provisions. I don't know how else to say it. People say, oh, Noberg, you're turning into some crazy greenie or something. No, I want these resources.
Yeah.
I want them. I want people to have jobs in these industries. But we can do all this and still accommodate wildlife. We've been making a lot of progress on that. And now, for whatever reason, is like, let's turn this into an industrial landscape wherever we can. I mean, if people read the details of what this is, there's very few BLM lands that are excluded from any of this.
Yeah.
There's a little bit more Forest Service that's excluded from some of this, but it really opens the gate on a lot of things.
I mean, there will be some new jobs created for sure. Right? I'm trying to think of like who does this benefit, right? I always like to ask like, who is this actually going to go and benefit? And sure, there'll probably be some new jobs, but there are a lot of people that really value public land, recreation, wildlife, hunting, fishing, whatever it is, that really get the short end of the stick on this one. And it's this like, the vast majority of the benefit is going to very wealthy individuals and very big corporations.
Very large,
and
many foreign corporations.
Yeah, and so that's the hard part to swallow. Is just like, maybe there will be a handful of people who, there's gonna be a few more jobs around, but in the scheme of things, I feel like the regular Joe really got screwed on this one.
Yeah, and they didn't cut the royalty on hard rock minerals of gold, silver, copper, zinc, all that stuff, because they currently don't pay a royalty.
Yeah, so you can't cut it.
So the summary of this is, if you think Congress is serious about managing your lands better, if you think they are serious about the U.S. taxpayer getting a good return on those lands, this is a complete giveaway.
Yeah.
They have taken resources which would have been converted to revenues through royalties and timber receipts, and they've just funneled them elsewhere for their own political, budgetary shenanigans, for repayment of a lot of their lobbyists/friends. And for what? You know who? And the group that is going to pay the greatest price are the rural communities that depend on public lands. Because all of those royalty cuts, those givebacks, those redirection of royalties back to the U.S. Treasury are coming out of the pocket of all these rural, small towns, small counties. So if you're pissed off about the fact that this has happened, or you're mad that your county or your school district is going to have big cuts, don't get mad at the Forest Service guy. Don't get mad at the BLM. Get mad at those folks in Congress who can't manage our land. Well, they could, who refuse to manage our lands in a way that they deserve to be managed.
Yeah. It's a
and
good
we
way
just
to put
touched the high spots, Marcus. We
Oh,
didn't
there's-
even get down in the valley.
There's so much to talk about on that. But what do you foresee in the future? Do you think that this will stick for the next 30 years or 20 years or whatever it is that a lot of these plans are in place? It seems like it extends into 20 years. Like, will it stick? Like,
that's the question some are asking. Political pendulums swing.
Yeah.
Like, we got a midterm election. Who knows what'll happen?
right.
But say that the other side takes over one of the houses of Congress, or the other side someday takes over all three.
Mm-hmm.
What are they going to do with all this stuff? Are they going to flip it all back. And so people are going to go and say, oh, I'm going to build a business around this giveaway program. Don't bet that someone couldn't change that somewhere down the road. Will they? I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the problem of partisan politics using our public lands and our public resources for their payments, their currency. You know, we all, in the hunting world, we say we want science-based management. There's nothing science-based about any of this stuff in here. It's all about who do we owe and how do we pay them some favors. And we're talking to the tune of billions and billions of dollars. But yet, the wrapper they wanted to put around it was, well, we got to sell some public lands to make this gap less. Well, the reason the gap is so damn high is because they're giving away our resources.
Yeah.
And they refuse to charge the hard rock mining industry even a penny. So
Yeah, that one continues to be one of the most blatant examples. I mean, it's like lowering royalty rates is, crazy. But then when you look at, there just are no royalty rates on hard rock and mineral stuff. It's crazy.
So I guess my summary to this is, if anyone watching thinks that Congress is serious about managing our public lands and getting a good return on them, they're not. Anything they say, any excuse they manufacture is just that, an excuse. Because all of this, the buck stops with them in Congress. They could fix every one of these things. They could get great returns on our public lands. They could manage our public lands better, but that's work. And they're just not up for it. They'd rather do a bunch of performative politics, what gets the most clicks and likes and views and gets them on the headline of the news. Managing lands properly, that's not sexy enough, I guess, these days. But all of us and the wildlife that lives out there, the wild things that live on these wild places, that's who's going to pay this price, along with those counties and cities and states who depend on these receipts that are now given away back to some other friend.
Yeah. Well, thanks for filling us in on it. It's going to be really interesting to see how this shakes out and everything is implemented over the coming years, because I think a lot of industry is going to tiptoe and be a little leery of it, like what we said, because the pendulum tends to swing. Yeah. And so it's like, if you're going to do something that affects you for a decade, it's going to be hard to want to invest that initial cost, and if you think it might get canceled down the road. So, but all of the mandatory stuff is that I'm really curious to see how that is implemented. It's going to be, it's going to be a shit show one way or the other, essentially.
I mean, we in most places, we don't even have the logging infrastructure of mills, of loggers, of truckers to get that much cut off the federal lands. Yeah. But, oh, well. Leave it to Congress.
Yeah, we will see.
Yeah. And people are going to comment and throw their, opinions and stuff out there. I just say, go read this bill. I think it's a few hundred pages. And read this stuff and just think about, okay, what was the motivation? Like you were asking, who benefits from this? Mm-hmm. There's an awful lot of cherry picking and an awful lot of handing out of favors in this that don't benefit the American taxpayer, that don't benefit proper land management or the wild things that we care about.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Randy.
Thank you, Marcus.